Resuming debate, the Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam. And if I may suggest that, yes, just lifting your mic a little bit. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'll begin my comments by highlighting what we are all agreeing on in this House. In the past few days of debate, I have heard agreement that we must denounce hate and hate symbols. Let's build on that consensus, because it has been exposed this past month that there is a far-right, sinister element that infiltrated the convoys at the highest levels. They are organized, well-funded, and have a stated goal of overthrowing our elected government. I take that threat very seriously. I heard most members of this House denounce these bad actors and recognize that their actions and intentions do not represent the Canada we want to pass on to the next generation. These are serious times, Madam Speaker, that call for serious debate and action that is appropriate and proportionate to the severity of this dangerous situation we find ourselves in. And let me be clear, these occupations are dangerous. They are not peaceful. They are unlawful. They never should have been allowed to become entrenched in our communities. And let me be clear that governments did have the resources to halt the occupation of Ottawa early on, but they failed to respond with the urgency required. Why do I say that? Because on social media, convoy organizers were openly sharing their intent, including plans for once they got to Ottawa. There was endless coverage of the convoy as it moved across Canada, and it was known from the beginning that factions of the convoy...
I interrupt the Honourable Member. Point of order from the Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, thank you so much, and I honestly apologize for interrupting my colleague. I just want to make sure that she did remember to share her time with a member from Vancouver Kingsway.
Thank you so much, the Honourable Member for Port Moody Coquitlam.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I did forget that. So yes, I'll be sharing my time. Thank you. So there was factions of that convoy that were displaying symbols of hate that was not taken seriously by governments and has not been taken serious for years. What has become clear through these last several weeks is that Canada does not have the tools to deal with hate or disinformation that is growing across our communities. The fear, intimidation, and lawlessness that has evolved on the streets of Ottawa and at borders across the country have shone a magnifying glass on how the government systems are not equipped to uphold even the most basic laws when hate and disinformation rear their ugly head and when white privilege underpins it. It has become glaringly obvious to Canadians that government let them down, left them on their own to deal with the consequences of unlawful occupations in their communities. This reality is threatening the safety of citizens. And the very...
Can I ask the Honourable Member for Don Valley East to please put himself on mute?
Have my time back from that?
Of course. No, we stopped counting the time. No, absolutely. And I apologize for the interruption. The Honourable Member may start again. Yes.
Thank you. This reality is threatening the safety of citizens, institutions, and the very sovereignty of the country. We know this threat is real and that the online environment is amplifying it. The power of online disinformation can be exemplified by the varied reports of a protester being trampled by a police horse this weekend. A phone call to my office Friday, I picked it up from a distraught constituent, as well as emails reported one victim was taken, one victim was a woman, or they were a senior woman, or they are a senior woman with a walker, or they were an Indigenous elder, that they suffered a shoulder injury, or maybe a horse stepped on their face and throat, or maybe they lost a limb or death. The only consistencies were inconsistencies in those stories. Madam Speaker, it's time to get serious about the very dangerous consequences of the spread of disinformation, which gave rise to the length and size of the unlawful occupation in Ottawa, along with occupations and blockades across Canada. Again, I will say it should not have come to this, but it did. So let's stop looking backwards in this House and start looking forward and acknowledging the facts we are dealing with. When Ottawa called a state of emergency, it did not stop the lawlessness on our streets. When Ontario called a state of emergency, it did not stop the lawlessness. And when Indigenous leaders called for the occupiers to go home, they did not. It was only when the Emergencies Act was invoked that finally there was some initial resolution to this unlawful attack on the rights and freedoms of the citizens of Ottawa. The interim chief of the Ottawa Police has been clear that without these additional powers, they would not have been able to achieve the outcomes so far. Now, many people, many members have spoken about how the threats are now over, but I want to share with this House what's happening in BC. Protests are building here, and the agitators are increasingly aggressive. The RCMP had to preemptively close down the border yesterday, and 16 were arrested. Other unlawful activity could not be addressed on the spot due to lack of resources. And here is another really sad security threat. Private citizens are now feeling compelled to stand up against these aggressors. In Vancouver yesterday, convoy supporters and counter-protesters were facing off in the streets. And in BC, at YVR, police presence has been increased and the costs of maintaining public safety at our borders in these times is mounting. And I have to share, Madam Speaker, that in the riding next to mine, the home of the provincial minister of public safety was affronted yesterday by protesters. In BC, this is far from over. The NDP takes the invocation of the Emergency Act under public disorder very seriously. We've said over and over again that we will not give a blank check to the government. The government will have to stay within the established powers, or we will withdraw any support. We will continue to protect peaceful protesters, including land defenders, and will protect the charter rights for all Canadians. Going forward, the federal government and all levels of government need to take responsibility for their failures, for not taking seriously the very real safety threats and infringements on the rights and freedoms that the majority of Canadians have endured these past weeks. Going forward, they must accept and address the very real threats of intolerance, hate, discrimination, and disinformation happening online and manifesting physically in our communities across Canada. These are real threats to the safety and security of every person and the institutions in this country, as well as our democracy and sovereignty. The NDP has consistently shown leadership during these occupations and has used the tools available as the progressive opposition to act. We've moved motions to investigate and expose weaknesses in crowdfunding platforms, brought forward an emergency debate on the occupation of Ottawa, and tabled bills in this House to address hate and hate symbols. The NDP has shown leadership in standing up for healthcare workers, frontline and essential workers, and all workers who have gotten us through these 2 years of difficult times. We continue to stand up for them. While the NDP has been focused on solutions, there has been a lack of forward thinking and leadership by this government. Madam Speaker, this government has failed in so many ways. They failed to take seriously the declining standard of living for Canadians. They are no longer in touch with what is really happening in our communities. The years of neglect for the need for affordable housing, not addressing the climate crisis with urgency, declining to introduce pharmacare, not addressing Canadians' high cell phone bills. I could go on. This government has created an environment where too many Canadians are hurting. And when people are hurting, when things are desperate, people can easily find themselves being taken advantage of by sinister actors that exploit those vulnerabilities for their personal gain. It's the job of parliamentarians to protect Canadians from that. It is late, Madam Speaker, and in this 11th hour, there is still work to be done to protect Canadians from the very real threat of hate and discrimination that fed off the vulnerabilities of exhausted, scared, and anxious Canadians who live in every riding of this country. What manifested in Ottawa, in Coutts, in Windsor, and in Surrey, and in Winnipeg is no accident. It is well-funded, well-organized, and exploitation of the weaknesses in our government and government systems that has led to hate and disinformation spread, and it's not over yet. In closing, I must look to the future too. And so I call in all my colleagues to support the NDP's Private Members Bill, C-229, which would prevent anyone from selling and displaying symbols that promote hatred and violence in this country going forward.